Jason Miller was not the kind of person who liked surprises. He liked things to be neat, organized, and under control. As the owner of Precision Works, a big manufacturing company, he took pride in making sure everything ran smoothly. His employees worked hard, machines hummed all day long, and products were shipped out on time. At least that's what he thought. But one morning, Jason woke up feeling uneasy. It wasn't because of anything specific. He just had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Over the past few weeks, he'd heard whispers from some of his managers about problems among the workers. People talked about tension on the factory floor, complaints about unfair treatment, and even rumors that employees were losing pay over tiny mistakes. At first, Jason brushed it off. He figured it was probably just gossip or exaggeration. After all, running a business wasn't easy, and sometimes people got upset when they didn't meet expectations. But the more he thought about it, the more curious he became. Was there really a problem? And if there was, why hadn't anyone told him? Directly, Jason decided he needed answers. Instead of calling a meeting with his managers or sending out surveys to his employees, he came up with a bold plan. He would go undercover. That way, he could see exactly what life was like for his workers without anyone knowing who he really was. It sounded risky, but Jason felt it was the only way to get honest information. To pull it off, Jason created a fake identity. He called himself Alex Carter, a new employee looking for steady work. He bought a pair of plain glasses, dressed in simple clothes, and practiced speaking in a slightly different tone so no one would recognize him. Then, he submitted an application online, pretending to be someone completely ordinary. When Jason arrived at the factory on his first day as Alex, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He parked his car far away from the main entrance just in case someone recognized his vehicle. Walking toward the building, he noticed how huge it looked. The Precision Works sign stood tall above the doors, and trucks lined up outside, ready to load finished goods. For a moment, Jason almost forgot why he was here. This place was his creation, his pride. How could anything be wrong? Inside, the HR manager greeted him warmly. She handed him a badge with the name Alex Carter printed on it and gave him a quick tour of the facility. Jason tried to act casual, nodding along as she explained the rules and safety guidelines. When she introduced him to his supervisor, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harris, Jason shook hands firmly, hoping he didn't look too awkward. His first assignment was on the assembly line. Jason joined a group of workers who were putting together small metal parts. They moved quickly, their hands flying over the pieces like clockwork. One of them, a woman named Maria, smiled at him and said, "You must be new here. Don't worry, we'll show you the ropes." Maria seemed friendly enough, and Jason appreciated her kindness. Another worker, a young man named Ryan, cracked jokes to lighten the mood. There was also Susan, an older woman who kept to herself but occasionally offered helpful tips. Jason listened carefully, trying to blend in while observing how everyone interacted. As the hours passed, Jason started to notice little things. Conversations between co-workers often turned serious when supervisors weren't around. Someone mentioned being docked pay because they'd forgotten to sign a form. Another complained about losing half a day's wages after accidentally dropping a tool. These stories made Jason frown. Could these penalties really be happening? During lunch break, Jason sat with Maria, Ryan, and Susan in the cafeteria. The room buzzed with chatter, but Jason focused on his table mates. Maria sighed and said, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Every little mistake costs us so much, it's exhausting." Ryan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I messed up last week, and now I'm short on rent money. I can't afford another slip-up." Susan stayed quiet for a moment before adding, "It's been like this for years. We try our best, but nobody's perfect. And the bosses don't care, they just take our pay and move on." Jason clenched his fists under the table. Hearing these stories firsthand made him angry. How could such a system exist in his own company? Why hadn't anyone brought this to his attention before? He wanted to speak up, to tell them he was the owner and he would fix it, but he couldn't. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Jason found himself struggling to keep up with the pace of the assembly line. His fingers fumbled with the parts, and he accidentally dropped one onto the floor. A nearby coworker shot him a sympathetic glance and whispered, "Be careful. If they catch you wasting materials, you'll get written up." Jason froze. Written up? For dropping one small piece? He glanced around nervously, wondering if anyone had seen. Thankfully, no one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. Still, the incident left him shaken. If even minor, mistakes carried such heavy consequences. How did his employees manage to survive? By the end of the day, Jason was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally, he felt drained. As he walked back to his car, he realized how much harder life was for his workers than he'd ever imagined. They didn't have the luxury of stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. They were stuck in a system that punished them relentlessly for being human. That night, Jason lay awake in bed replaying the events of the day in his mind. He thought about Maria, Ryan, and Susan. Their faces, their voices, their struggles. He thought about the fear he'd seen in their eyes whenever they talked about making mistakes. Most of all, he thought about the guilt gnawing at him. This was his company. These were his people. And somehow he'd let them down. The next morning, Jason woke up with renewed determination. Going undercover had been the right decision. He still had a lot to learn. But already, he knew one thing for certain. Something had to change. Whatever it took, he would find a way to make Precision Works a better place. Not just for himself, but for everyone who worked there. For now, though, he had to stay patient. He couldn't rush into fixing things without understanding the full scope of the problem. So Jason put on his glasses, slipped into his disguise, and headed back to the factory, ready to face another day as Alex Carter. Little did he know, the hardest part of his journey was still ahead. Jason woke up early the next morning, his mind racing with thoughts from the day before. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria, Ryan, and Susan, their stories, their struggles, and the fear that seemed to hang over them like a shadow. As he got dressed in his plain work clothes and adjusted his glasses, he reminded himself why he was doing this. He needed to learn more, to dig deeper into the system that governed his employees' lives. When Jason arrived at the factory, he felt more comfortable than he had the day before. He knew where to park, how to clock in, and which station to go to. His coworkers greeted him warmly, calling him Alex and asking how his first day had gone. Jason smiled and said it had been fine, though inside, he was anything but calm. The morning started like any other. Jason stood at his spot on the assembly line, carefully following instructions from Susan, who worked beside him. She was patient and kind, showing him tricks to speed up his work without making mistakes. "You'll get the hang of it," she said with an encouraging nod. "Just take your time." But even as Jason tried to focus, he noticed the tension around him. Conversations between workers often turned serious when supervisors weren't nearby. During a break in the workflow, Ryan leaned over and whispered, "Hey, Alex, whatever you do, don't mess up today. Last week, I lost almost half my paycheck because I dropped a part. Can you believe that?" Jason nodded slowly, pretending to understand. Inside, he was seething. How could dropping a single part cost someone so much money? It didn't seem fair, but he kept his mouth shut. He didn't want to draw attention to himself or risk blowing his cover. Later that morning, Maria joined the conversation. Her voice was soft but full of frustration. "It's not just the pay cuts," she said. "It's the stress. Every little thing feels like a test. If you forget to log out properly, if you're late by 5 minutes, if you make one tiny mistake, it all adds up. Some days I wonder if it's worth it." Susan chimed in, her tone bitter. "They don't care about us. All they care about is numbers. As long as production stays high, they'll keep squeezing us until there's nothing left." Jason listened quietly, absorbing every word. These weren't just complaints. They were cries for help. Each story painted a picture of a workplace where fear ruled over fairness, where people were treated like machines rather than humans. Jason felt a deep sense of guilt settle in his chest. This was his company, and somehow he'd let this happen. As the hours passed, Jason began to notice patterns. Supervisors walked through the aisles frequently, watching the workers closely. Whenever someone made a mistake, even something minor, they jotted it down on a clipboard. Later, those notes would likely be used to justify pay deductions. Jason watched as one worker, a middle-aged man named Carl, was reprimanded for taking too long during a bathroom break. The supervisor's voice was sharp and cold, leaving Carl looking defeated. During lunch, Jason sat with Maria, Ryan, and Susan again. They talked about their families, their dreams, and their fears. Maria shared how hard it was to balance work and raising her 2 children. "I'm always tired," she admitted, "but I can't afford to slow down. One missed paycheck and we'd be in real trouble." Ryan nodded. "Same here. My mom depends on me to help with bills. If I lose too much pay, it affects everyone." Jason listened intently, his heart aching for them. He wanted to tell them he understood, that he was on their side, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked questions, trying to learn as much as possible. "How long has this penalty system been in place?" he asked casually. Maria shrugged. "Years, I think. It started small, but it keeps getting worse. Now it feels like they're looking for reasons to punish us," Susan added. "And the worst part is there's no way to fight back. You can't appeal the decisions. Once they dock your pay, that's it." Jason clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. The more he learned, the angrier he became. How could such a rigid, unforgiving system exist in a company he believed was fair and efficient? He realized now that he'd been blind to the reality of life on the factory floor. His office, located far away from the noise and chaos of production, had shielded him from the truth. That afternoon, Jason decided to push his limits a little further. He asked Maria if she could show him how to use a different machine, hoping to gain access to areas where he might overhear more conversations. Maria agreed, happy to help. As they moved to another section of the factory, Jason struck up a conversation with a group of older workers. One of them, a man named Greg, shook his head sadly. "It's gotten bad, Alex, real bad. Used to be if you messed up, they'd give you a warning. Now it's straight to penalties, no second chances." Another worker, a woman named Linda, chimed in. "And it's not just the money. It's the way it makes you feel, like you're never good enough. No matter how hard you try, it's never enough." Jason nodded sympathetically, his stomach churning. He wanted to scream, to tell them he was the owner and he would fix everything. But he knew he couldn't. Not yet. He had to gather more evidence to fully understand the scope of the problem before he could act. By the end of the day, Jason was physically and emotionally drained. As he walked back to his car, he replayed the conversations in his mind. Maria's exhaustion, Ryan's worries, Susan's bitterness. It all weighed heavily on him. He thought about the supervisors, their clipboards, and the constant pressure they put on the workers. Most of all, he thought about the penalties, the endless cycle of fear and punishment that trapped his employees. That night, Jason sat alone in his study, staring at the wall. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down everything he'd learned. The penalty system, the lack of appeals, the toll it took on morale. He wrote it all down, determined to remember every detail. He also listed potential solutions: training programs to reduce errors, a review board to handle disputes fairly, and incentives for supervisors to focus on support rather than punishment. As he wrote, Jason realized something important. Fixing the problem wouldn't be easy. It would require changes at every level of the company, from policies to culture. But he was ready. For the first time in years, he felt truly motivated, not by profit or success, but by a desire to make things right. The next morning, Jason woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he was committed to seeing it through. Putting on his disguise once again, he headed back to the factory, ready to face another day as Alex Carter. Little did he know, the challenges ahead would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the third day of his undercover mission, Jason was starting to piece things together. He had seen enough to know that something was deeply wrong at Precision Works, but he still didn't fully understand how the penalty system worked, or why it had become so harsh. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to dig deeper. That morning, Jason arrived at the factory earlier than usual. He wanted some time to explore before the shift began. As he walked through the quiet halls, he noticed a small office near the break room. The door was slightly ajar, and inside he could see stacks of paperwork and a whiteboard covered in notes. Curious, Jason peeked inside. The office belonged to one of the supervisors. On the desk lay a thick binder labeled Employee Records. Beside it was a clipboard with a list of names, each accompanied by notes about mistakes and penalties. Jason's heart sank as he skimmed the entries. One worker had lost 20% of their pay for forgetting to clock out. Another was docked for taking an extra 5 minutes during lunch. It seemed like every minor error came with a steep price. Jason stepped back quickly, making sure no one saw him. He couldn't risk getting caught snooping around. But what he'd seen confirmed his worst fears. The penalty system wasn't just strict, it was ruthless. Every mistake, no matter how small, was recorded and punished without mercy. Later that morning, Jason joined Maria, Ryan, and Susan on the assembly line. They greeted him warmly, unaware of what he'd discovered. As they worked, Jason tried to steer the conversation toward the penalty system again. "How do they decide how much to deduct?" he asked casually. Maria hesitated, glancing around, to make sure no supervisors were nearby. "It depends," she said quietly. "Some errors are worth more than others. Forgetting to log your hours might cost you 10%. Damaging equipment could be 30% or more. And if you argue about it, they'll add another penalty for insubordination." Ryan nodded grimly. "Yeah, there's no winning. Once they mark you down, that's it, you can't fight it." Susan chimed in, her voice bitter. "And don't think about going to HR, they'll just tell you it's company policy. No appeals, no second chances. You either deal with it or quit." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just a flawed system. It was designed to keep workers powerless. There was no way to challenge the penalties, no opportunity to explain extenuating circumstances. It was a one-way street leading straight to frustration and despair. During his break, Jason wandered into the break room, hoping to find more clues. On the bulletin board, he spotted a poster titled "Zero Tolerance Policy." Below it was a detailed chart showing various infractions and their corresponding penalties. Reading through the list, Jason realized how absurdly specific it was. Typing the wrong product code? 15% deduction. Leaving a tool out of place? 10%. Even being late to your station by 30 seconds resulted in a 5% loss. Jason snapped a mental picture of the chart, knowing he couldn't write anything down without raising suspicion. He also noticed a smaller note taped to the corner of the board. Supervisors receive bonuses for maintaining high compliance rates. That explained a lot. The supervisors weren't just enforcing the rules, they were incentivized to find reasons to penalize workers. It created a toxic cycle where employees were constantly under scrutiny, and supervisors were rewarded for cracking down harder. Back on the factory floor, Jason kept his eyes open for signs of this dynamic in action. Sure enough, he soon witnessed it firsthand. A young woman named Tina accidentally dropped a box of parts while moving them to a storage shelf. The crash echoed through the room, drawing the attention of everyone nearby, including Mr. Harris, the stern supervisor. Harris strode over, his face unreadable. "What happened here?" he demanded. Tina stammered, clearly flustered. I'm sorry, sir, I tripped. I'll clean it up right away." Harris shook his head. "Too late. Those parts are damaged now. That's coming out of your paycheck." Tina's face fell. "But it was an accident. I didn't mean to." "Policy is policy," Harris interrupted, cutting her off. He made a note on his clipboard and walked away without another word. Jason watched as Tina slumped against the wall, tears welling up in her eyes. A coworker patted her shoulder and whispered, "Don't worry. We've all been there. Just try to be careful next time." The moment stayed with Jason long after the incident faded into the background noise of the factory. He couldn't stop, thinking about Tina's expression, the shame, the helplessness, the fear. How many times had scenes like this played out without him ever knowing? How many lives had been affected by this relentless system? That evening, Jason sat with Maria, Ryan, and Susan during dinner. They talked about their day, sharing stories of close calls and near misses. Jason listened intently, piecing together the bigger picture. He learned that the penalties weren't just financial. They took a toll on morale, health, and relationships. Workers lived in constant fear of making mistakes, which made them anxious, exhausted, and prone to burnout. "I used to love my job," Susan admitted bitterly. "Now I just count down the days until retirement. I can't wait to leave this place behind." Maria nodded. "Same here, but I can't afford to quit. Not with 2 kids to support." Ryan sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone even cares about us. We're just numbers to them." Jason clenched his fists under the table, fighting back anger. These weren't just numbers. They were people. Hard-working, dedicated individuals who deserved better. He thought about the bonuses supervisors received for enforcing penalties. Was that really what drove the company forward? Fear and punishment? As the night wore on, Jason realized he needed to act. He couldn't sit back and watch his employees suffer any longer. But he also knew he couldn't reveal his true identity yet. Not until he had concrete evidence to present to upper management. So he resolved to gather as much information as possible. Over the next few days, Jason continued observing and asking questions. He spoke to workers from different departments, learning about variations in the penalty system and how it impacted their daily lives. He discovered that some areas of the factory were stricter than others, depending on the supervisor in charge. He also found out that newer employees bore the brunt of the penalties, since they were more likely to make mistakes while learning the ropes. One evening, Jason stayed late after his shift ended. He wandered through the factory, taking note of security cameras and locked doors. If he wanted to expose the system, he would need proof, hard evidence that showed how widespread and damaging it was. But breaking into offices or hacking files was out of the question. He had to be smart, careful, and patient. Finally, an idea came to him. The next morning, Jason approached Maria and asked if she'd be willing to share her experiences anonymously. "I'm thinking of writing a letter to someone higher up," he said. "Maybe if we collect enough stories, they'll listen." Maria looked skeptical but agreed. "It's worth a shot," she said. "Just promise me you won't use my name." Jason promised, and over the following days, he gathered testimonials from other workers as well. Each story added weight to his growing case against the penalty system. By the end of the week, he had a folder full of notes ready to present to whoever would listen. Jason knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenging such a deeply ingrained system would require courage, determination, and allies. But as he looked around the factory, seeing the faces of Maria, Ryan, Susan, and countless others, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. These were his people, and he owed it to them to fight for change. That night, Jason sat alone in his study, reviewing the evidence he'd collected. He wrote down ideas for reforming the penalty system, focusing on fairness, transparency, and accountability. He imagined a future where Precision Works wasn't just profitable, but compassionate, a place where employees felt valued and respected. For the first time in years, Jason felt truly inspired. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. Putting on his disguise once again, he headed back to the factory, determined to finish what he'd started. Little did he know, the hardest part of his mission was still to come. Jason's 4th day undercover started like any other, but he could feel the weight of everything he'd learned pressing down on him. He had gathered stories from his co-workers, taken mental notes of the penalty system, and even witnessed firsthand how harshly mistakes were punished. But now, it was his turn to face the consequences. That morning, Jason arrived at the factory feeling determined. He planned to push himself harder, to show that he was capable and careful. He didn't want to give anyone a reason to doubt Alex Carter. But no matter how hard he tried, mistakes happened. And today, one happened to him. It was late in the afternoon and the assembly line was moving faster than usual. Jason struggled to keep up, his hands trembling slightly as he handled small, metal parts. His mind raced with thoughts of all the penalties he'd heard about, dropped tools, damaged pieces, missed steps. He told himself to stay calm, to focus. But then it happened. In his haste, Jason misplaced a component. It slipped from his fingers and fell onto the conveyor belt, causing a brief disruption. The machine jammed for a moment before another worker quickly fixed it. No real harm was done, just a minor delay, but Jason froze. His heart pounded as he glanced around nervously, waiting for someone to notice. And someone did. Mr. Harris, the stern supervisor, appeared almost instantly. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, landing on Jason. "What's going on here?" he barked. Jason swallowed hard. I'm sorry, sir. I dropped something. It won't happen again." Harris didn't look convinced. He grabbed his clipboard and scribbled a note. "This kind of carelessness costs us time and money," he said coldly. "You'll see the deduction on your next paycheck." Jason nodded stiffly, trying to hide his frustration. Inside, he felt a mix of anger and humiliation. How could such a small mistake cost him so much? He wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't intentional, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The system didn't care about explanations. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jason worked silently, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. He thought about Maria, Ryan, Susan, and all the others who had shared similar experiences. Now he understood exactly how they felt. Powerless, trapped, frustrated. It was a bitter lesson, but it reinforced his resolve to change things. During his break, Jason sat with Maria and Ryan, avoiding eye contact. They noticed his mood immediately. "Hey, Alex, you okay?" Maria asked gently. Jason hesitated before speaking. "Yeah, I just messed up earlier. Supervisors caught me and now I'm getting penalized," Maria frowned. "What happened?" "I dropped a part. Nothing major, it barely slowed things down. But apparently that's enough to lose pay." Ryan shook his head sympathetically. "Welcome to our world. You get used to it after a while, though it never gets easier." Susan joined them a moment. Later, her expression grim. "Did Harris write you up?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, said it'll come out of my paycheck." Susan sighed. "That guy loves his clipboard. Don't take it personally. He does the same to everyone." Jason forced a weak smile, grateful for their support. But inside, he seethed. This wasn't right. Not for him, not for Maria, not for anyone. The penalty system wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. And it was destroying morale, piece by piece. Later that evening, Jason found himself sitting alone in the break room during a slow period. He stared at the bulletin board, reading the zero-tolerance policy poster again. The words seemed colder, now more menacing. Typing errors, misplaced tools, forgotten forms, all punishable offenses. Even being late by seconds meant losing money. It was absurd, dehumanizing, and completely unnecessary. As Jason sat there lost in thought, Tina, the young woman who had dropped the box of parts days earlier, walked in. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped. Seeing Jason, she hesitated before sitting down across from him. "Hey," she said softly. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Jason replied, gesturing to the empty seat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Tina broke the silence. "I heard what happened to you today. About the penalty." Jason nodded. "Yeah, first time for me, but I guess I should have seen it coming." Tina gave him a sad smile. "It doesn't stop hurting no matter how many times it happens. Feels like they're always watching, always waiting for you to slip up." Jason leaned forward, his voice low. "Do you think anyone would listen if we spoke up? If we told them how bad this system is?" Tina shrugged. "Maybe. But who would we tell? The supervisors? HR? They're the ones enforcing it." "What about higher-ups?" Jason pressed. Someone must care about what's happening here. Tina laughed bitterly. Higher-ups don't care about people like us. We're just numbers to them. As long as production stays high, they're happy. Jason clenched his fists under the table. That wasn't true. Not anymore. He cared. He was the owner. And once he revealed his identity, he would do everything in his power to fix this mess. But he couldn't say that yet. Not until he had proof, allies, and a solid plan. Over the next few days, Jason continued gathering evidence. He wrote down every story he heard, every rule he saw enforced unfairly. He paid close attention to how supervisors interacted with workers, noting patterns of intimidation and favoritism. He also observed how penalties affected productivity. Workers were so afraid of making mistakes that they rushed through tasks, often leading to even bigger problems. One evening, Jason stayed late after his shift ended. He wandered through the factory, thinking about the changes he needed to make. He imagined a workplace where employees weren't afraid to ask questions or admit when they made a mistake. A place where training programs helped reduce errors instead of punishing them. Most importantly, a company where people felt valued and respected. As he walked past the supervisor's office, Jason noticed the light was still on. Curiosity got the better place, and he peeked inside. Mr. Harris was seated at his desk reviewing paperwork. On top of the pile was a report detailing weekly penalties and compliance rates. Beside it lay a memo congratulating Harris for achieving a record low error rate among his team. Jason's blood boiled. So this was the truth. Supervisors were rewarded for cracking down on workers, regardless of whether it improved efficiency or morale. It wasn't about quality control, it was about control itself. The next morning, Jason met with Maria, Ryan, and Susan before their shift began. He pulled them aside, making sure no one else was listening. "Listen," he said quietly. "I've been thinking. We need to do something about this penalty system together." Maria raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to speak up, share our stories, show how this system is hurting everyone. Maybe if we present it the right way, someone will listen." Ryan looked skeptical. "Who would we talk to? Management?" "Yes," Jason replied firmly. "But not just anyone. Someone high enough to make a difference. I have an idea, but I'll need your help." Susan crossed her arms. "Why should we trust you? You're new here. What makes you think you can change anything?" Jason hesitated, knowing he couldn't reveal his true identity yet. "Because I've seen how this system works, I've lived it, and I know it's wrong. Please just give me a chance." After a long pause, Maria nodded. "Okay, we'll help. But if this goes south, we're blaming you." Jason smiled weakly. "Fair enough." Over the next few days, the group worked together to gather evidence. They collected testimonials from other workers, documented specific cases of excessive penalties, and highlighted how the system impacted productivity and morale. Jason kept everything organized, ensuring they had a strong case to present. Finally, the day came for Jason to reveal his true identity. He called Maria, Ryan, and Susan into a private meeting room during lunch. Closing the door behind them, he took a deep breath and removed his glasses. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice steady. "My name isn't Alex Carter. It's Jason Miller. I'm the owner of Precision Works." The room fell silent. Maria, Ryan, and Susan stared at him stunned. For a moment, no one spoke. "You're the owner?" Maria finally managed to say. Jason nodded. "Yes. I went undercover because I wanted to understand what life was really like for my employees. What I found shocked me. The penalty system, the fear, the stress, it's unacceptable, and I promise you I'm going to fix it." Ryan blinked, unsure what to say. "So, you're not mad that we criticized the company?" "Of course not," Jason replied. "Your honesty helped me see the truth. Without you, I might never have realized how broken this system is." Susan crossed her arms, still wary. "What are you going to do about it?" Jason explained his plan. He would call an emergency meeting with upper management and present the evidence they had gathered. He would propose reforms, including training programs, a review board for disputes, and incentives for positive behavior rather than punishment. Most importantly, he vowed to eliminate the harshest penalties altogether. By the end of the conversation, Maria, Ryan, and Susan seemed cautiously hopeful. They agreed to support Jason's efforts, trusting that he truly intended to make a difference. That night, Jason sat alone in his study, reviewing the materials one last time. Tomorrow he would confront his executives and demand change. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing the right thing for his employees, for his company, and for himself. The day had finally come. Jason woke up early, his stomach churning with nerves. Today was the day he would confront his executives and demand change. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Some of them might resist, argue, or even try to defend the current system, but he was ready. Armed with evidence, testimonials, and a clear plan, Jason walked into Precision Works headquarters determined to make things right. As he entered the conference room, Jason took a deep breath. The space was filled with familiar faces. Senior managers, department heads, and members of the executive team. They greeted him politely, unaware of what was about to unfold. Jason nodded to each of them as he took his seat at the head of the table. For a moment, everything felt normal. The same meetings, the same discussions, the same routines that had shaped his company for years. But today was different. Jason cleared his throat and stood up. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I called this meeting because we need to talk about something serious, something I've only recently become aware of." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around the table, expressions shifted from curiosity to concern. One of the executives, a woman named Karen, raised an eyebrow. "What's this about, Jason?" "It's about our employees," Jason replied. "Specifically the penalty system we've put in place. I've discovered that it's not just strict, it's harmful. It's destroying morale, hurting productivity, and making life unbearable for the people who keep this company running." A murmur rippled through the room. Some executives exchanged glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued. Jason pressed on, pulling out a folder filled with notes and documents. "Over the past few weeks, I've been undercover on the factory floor. I worked alongside my employees, listened to their stories, and saw firsthand how this system affects them." One of the older executives, a man named Robert, frowned. "Undercover? Why would you do that? We have reports, surveys. We know what's happening." "No," Jason said sharply. "You don't. Reports only show numbers. Surveys only reflect what people are willing to say. But when you're there, living it, seeing it, you understand the reality. And the reality is this: our workers live in fear. Every mistake, no matter how small, costs them dearly. Dropping a tool, forgetting to sign a form, taking an extra minute during lunch, it all adds up, and it's crushing them." Karen crossed her arms, her tone defensive. "These policies exist for a reason, Jason. They ensure quality control and accountability. Without them, mistakes would pile up, and production would suffer." "That's not true," Jason countered. "In fact, the opposite is happening. Workers are so afraid of penalties that they rush through tasks, leading to bigger problems. Morale is at an all-time low, turnover rates are climbing, and trust between employees and management has eroded completely." He turned on the projector behind him, displaying charts and graphs based on the data he'd collected. "Look at these numbers. Productivity hasn't improved since we tightened the penalty system. It's actually declined. Absenteeism is up, and employee satisfaction scores are plummeting. This isn't working. It's doing more harm than good." The room fell silent as the executives studied the information. Some looked thoughtful, while others remained unconvinced. Robert leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Even if that's true, Jason, changing the system won't be simple. Supervisors rely on penalties to maintain order. If we remove them, chaos will follow. Not if we replace them with something better," Jason said firmly. He flipped to another slide showing his proposed reforms. "Instead of punishing every mistake, Let's focus on training programs to reduce errors. Let's create a review board where employees can appeal penalties and explain their side of the story. And let's incentivize supervisors to support their teams rather than crack down on them. Karen tilted her head, considering his suggestions. It sounds idealistic, but how do you propose implementing these changes? You're talking about overhauling decades of policy. I'll start small, Jason replied. We'll test the new system in one department, gather feedback, and adjust as needed. Once we see results, we'll roll it out across the company. Yes, it'll take time and effort, but it's worth it. Our employees deserve better. The discussion continued for hours, with arguments and counter-arguments flying back and forth. Some executives supported Jason's ideas, praising his willingness to address the issue. Others remained skeptical, warning of potential risks and challenges. Through it all, Jason stayed calm, presenting facts, sharing stories, and reminding everyone of the human cost of the current system. By the end of the meeting, Jason had secured tentative approval from most of the executives. They agreed to trial his reforms in one department, provided he monitored progress closely and reported back regularly. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start, a step toward a brighter future. That evening, Jason met with Maria, Ryan, and Susan in the break room. They had been waiting anxiously to hear how the meeting went. When Jason walked in, they immediately noticed the look of relief on his face. So? Maria asked eagerly. What happened? Jason smiled. They agreed to give it a shot. Starting next month, we'll implement the new system in your department. If it works, we'll expand it to the rest of the company. Ryan grinned. That's amazing, you actually did it. Susan nodded, though her expression remained cautious. What about the penalties? Are they gone for good? Not yet, Jason admitted, but we're reducing them significantly, and we're setting up a review board so no one gets penalized unfairly again. Maria clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with hope. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for listening to us, for caring enough to make a difference. Jason shook his head. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. There's still a lot of work to do, and I'll need your help every step of the way. The group spent the rest of the evening discussing the upcoming changes. Jason explained the details of the new system, answering questions and addressing concerns. He emphasized the importance of teamwork and open communication, promising to stay involved throughout the process. Over the next few weeks, Jason worked tirelessly to prepare for the trial run. He collaborated with HR to design training programs, consulted with legal experts to draft fair policies, and met regularly with Maria, Ryan, and Susan to ensure their voices were heard. He also reached out to other employees, inviting them to share feedback and suggestions. When the day of implementation arrived, excitement buzzed through the factory. Workers gathered in the break room, eager to learn about the changes. Jason stood at the front, flanked by Maria, Ryan, and Susan, who had volunteered to help explain the new system. For years, Jason began, his voice strong and sincere. We've operated under a system that punished mistakes instead of preventing them. That ends today. From now on, we're focusing on support, training, and fairness. Mistakes will still happen. They're part of being human. But instead of penalizing you, we'll work together to fix them. Applause erupted throughout the room, echoing off the walls. For the first time in years, employees felt seen, heard, and valued. Hope replaced fear, and camaraderie replaced tension. As the weeks passed, the positive effects became undeniable. Errors decreased thanks to better training, and morale soared as workers embraced the new culture of collaboration. Supervisors, once feared and resented, began building stronger relationships with their teams. Even skeptics among the executives started to acknowledge the benefits of the reform. Jason watched it all unfold with pride. He had taken a risk by going undercover, confronting uncomfortable truths and challenging entrenched systems. But in doing so, he had transformed not just his company but himself. He realized that leadership wasn't just about profits and efficiency, it was about people, about creating a workplace where everyone could thrive. One evening, as Jason sat alone in his study, he reflected on the journey he'd undertaken. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Precision Works was becoming the kind of company he could truly be proud of, one built on trust, respect, and compassion. Little did he know, the changes he'd set in motion would inspire others, far beyond the factory walls. Stories of his efforts spread, earning recognition for Precision Works as a leader in employee welfare. Jason's bold decision to step into his workers' shoes had sparked a movement, proving that even the smallest acts of empathy could lead to profound change. And as he closed his notebook for the night, Jason knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Months had passed since Jason introduced the new system at Precision Works, and the transformation was remarkable. What had once been a tense, fear-filled workplace had become a place of hope and collaboration. Employees no longer dreaded coming to work. Instead, they felt proud to be part of something meaningful. The changes weren't just surface level, they ran deep, touching every corner of the company. Jason watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and relief. He often walked through the factory, chatting with workers and checking in on how things were going. People greeted him warmly now, calling him by name and sharing updates about their lives. It was a stark contrast to the distant, formal relationship he'd had with his employees before. Now, he wasn't just the owner. He was a leader who occurred one morning as Jason made his rounds. Maria approached him with a wide smile. "Hey Jason," she said, "have you heard? I got approved for that promotion I applied for." "That's wonderful, Maria," Jason replied, genuinely happy for her. "You've earned it." Maria nodded, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without the training program. It gave me the skills and the confidence I needed." "Thank you." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. Hearing stories like this made everything worth it. "Don't thank me," he said softly. "Thank yourself. You worked hard for this." Later that day, Ryan stopped Jason near the break room. "Guess what?" he said excitedly. "I'm starting night classes next week. I'm finally going to finish my degree." "That's fantastic, Ryan," Jason said, shaking his hand. "How are you managing both work and school?" Ryan grinned. "The flexible schedule you set up helps a lot. Plus, knowing I won't lose half my paycheck if I make a mistake gives me peace of mind. I can focus on my goals now." Jason smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over him. These were the moments he lived for, the moments when he saw his employees thriving, not just surviving. Susan, too, had noticed the change. She'd started mentoring newer workers, helping them adjust to the job without fear of penalties. Her bitterness had faded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. As the weeks turned into months, the positive effects rippled throughout the company. Productivity soared as workers became more engaged and motivated. Absenteeism dropped, and turnover rates plummeted. Even customers noticed the difference. Orders were fulfilled faster, products were higher quality, and customer service improved significantly. But perhaps the most surprising outcome was the shift in company culture. Supervisors, once feared and resented, began working alongside their teams, offering guidance and encouragement rather than punishment. They attended workshops on leadership and empathy, learning how to build trust and foster collaboration. Slowly but surely, the divide between management and employees began to close. Jason knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges to face and improvements to make. But for the first time in years, he felt optimistic about the future. Precision Works wasn't perfect, but it was better, and that was enough. One afternoon, Jason called a company-wide meeting to celebrate the progress they'd made. Workers gathered in the cafeteria, filling the space with laughter and chatter. When Jason stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, the noise quieted, and everyone turned to listen. "I want to start by saying thank you," Jason began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "Thank you to each and every one of you for your hard work, your patience, and your courage. This hasn't been an easy process, but together we've accomplished something incredible." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others smiled proudly. When I first went undercover, I didn't know what to expect. I thought I understood our company, but I quickly realized I had no idea what life was really like for you. The stress, the fear, the constant pressure, it broke my heart, and it made me determined to do better. Jason gestured to Maria, Ryan, and Susan, who stood nearby. These three individuals helped me see the truth. They trusted me with their stories, supported my efforts, and pushed me to keep going when things got tough. Without them, none of this would have been possible. Applause erupted throughout the room, echoing off the walls. Maria blushed, while Ryan raised a hand in acknowledgement. Susan simply smiled, her expression softening. Today, Jason continued, we're not just celebrating numbers or profits. We're celebrating people. Your resilience, your dedication, your humanity, it's what makes precision work special. And moving forward, that's what we'll continue to prioritize. He outlined plans for further improvements, expanding training programs, introducing wellness initiatives, and creating opportunities for career growth. Each announcement was met with cheers and applause. By the end of the speech, the energy in the room was electric. Afterward, Jason mingled with his employees, shaking hands and posing for photos. Someone handed him a cake decorated with the words, "Thank you, Jason," in bold letters. Laughter filled the air as everyone dug in, enjoying slices of dessert and sharing stories. That evening, Jason sat alone in his study, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about Maria, Ryan, Susan, and all the others who had inspired him to take action. He thought about the late nights spent planning reforms, the heated debates with executives, and the countless small victories along the way. Most of all, he thought about the lessons he'd learned. Going undercover had been a risk, a leap of faith, but it had taught him the value of empathy. He'd seen firsthand how policies shaped lives, how decisions made in boardrooms echoed on factory floors. And he'd realized that true leadership wasn't about authority or control. It was about listening, understanding, and doing what was right, even when it was hard. Jason picked up his notebook, flipping through pages filled with notes and ideas. He jotted down a few thoughts for future projects, community outreach programs, partnerships with local schools, and initiatives to reduce the company's environmental impact. There was still so much to do, so many ways to make Precision Works even better. As he closed the notebook and turned off the light, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had set out to fix a broken system, but in the process he had found something far greater, a renewed sense of purpose. Precision Works wasn't just a business anymore. It was a family built on trust, respect, and compassion. And, as he drifted off to sleep, Jason knew one thing for certain: the best days of Precision Works were yet to come.